Hello, I'm Sue Hay.
And I'm Campbell Roberts, and in this episode we're talking about social hazards. There are a number of activities in New Zealand which people enjoy, willingly undertake, but can pose a risk to them, their families and even their neighbours. These activities include the consumption of alcohol and drugs, gambling and borrowing money unwisely. Given the risks associated with such activities, we can collectively describe them as social hazards.
In this episode, looking at the issues that might influence how we vote, we discuss why the problems of social hazards are a serious public policy issue that deserves greater attention from our politicians and therefore from us as voters.
Hey everyone, a social hazard is an activity that causes some sort of social risk or harm. This harm is likely to be widespread and extend beyond the person who chooses to engage in that activity. Often, this harm happens through addiction, a form of bondage in which people get hooked and then struggle to escape. Perhaps the biggest social hazard we face in New Zealand is that of alcohol and its excessive consumption and abuse. The police estimate that alcohol is an associated factor in 40% of the crime committed in our country. The economic cost of alcohol abuse has been estimated at over $1.6 billion per year. Yet alcohol is treated almost as a normal commodity. It is possible to buy it along with your groceries, and some liquor stores in some neighbourhoods are as common as your corner dairy. Gambling, and especially gambling on gaming machines or pokies, can be highly addictive. For many people, this addiction has been the source of financial ruin. It has also led some to criminal offending. Like alcohol, gambling is freely available and is even more prevalent in low-income communities. Loan sharks and excessive debt are another social hazard. While borrowing money is fairly commonplace, people are sometimes trapped in an endless cycle of debt through misleading promotions and complicated contracts that involve excessive interest rates and heavy penalties. To enforce contracts and to extract payments, some loan sharks revert to intimidation and standover tactics, yet little is done to provide consumers with protection or to actually lift business practices. Many of our poorer suburbs and towns are a minefield of social hazards. This is the main street of Manurewa, which is typical of many South Auckland suburbs. Along with the normal range of small retail businesses, we have a large number of liquor stores, pokie bars and money lenders. Within 5 minutes of here, there are over 100 pokie machines in 8 bars or clubs. And until it was outlawed, there was even a so-called legal high store that did a roaring trade in this community. This pattern is repeated in low-income suburbs and towns throughout our country. Businesses like liquor stores, pokie bars and loan sharks can cause havoc in poor communities, partly because of the addictive nature of what they offer and partly because of how commonplace and how normal they are in communities such as these. Against these dangers, there is very light-handed regulation of these activities. Literally any budding entrepreneur with an eye to lucrative market can set up shop with little or no regard for the social consequences of what they are doing. In a sense, however, none of this is an accident. Social hazards seem to concentrate in poor and vulnerable communities. The number of pokie machines in parts of South Auckland is nearly 3 times that in more affluent suburbs of Eastern Auckland. Where well-off communities get cafes and banks, poor communities get pokie bars and loan sharks. But should poor communities and vulnerable people be exposed to such social hazards? And should the light-handed regulation of these activities be allowed to continue simply because they are concentrated in places like Manurewa?
The Salvation Army is advocating for 4 significant policy changes around the area of social hazards.
Firstly, the Army believes alcohol is too easily available in local neighbourhoods, and there should be greater control over where and when liquor is sold. Recent liquor law reforms and the creation of local liquor plans may bring about such limitation, but we think real leadership is required from central government rather than simply leaving it to local councils. We're advocating for nationally set opening and closing times, especially for off-licence liquor outlets. We believe these hours should be limited from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Secondly, the Salvation Army is one of the country's largest providers of addiction treatment programs and has a good understanding of this policy area. A critical gap in responding to addiction issues is the absence of early interventions for youth who have growing problems with alcohol or other addictions. The Army believes that more funding and greater effort should be given to providing youth offenders with addiction counselling and treatment when their offending is addiction related.
Our third concern is to ensure politicians adequately control gambling opportunities and expansion. As we've heard, pokie machines have great potential to create harm, and government should legislate to minimise the harmful effects. Gambling shouldn't be normalised so vulnerable individuals and their families are put at risk. Further control is needed for the Lotteries Commission, which is currently attempting to increase sales through the promotion of checkout lotto. Policies are required which reduce and don't increase gambling harm in New Zealand.
Fourthly, through our network of budgeting services, the Salvation Army helps thousands of families that are struggling with incredible debt. While some personal responsibility for this debt should be acknowledged, the way debt is sold to people is often misleading and therefore quite unfair. As well, the tactics used to enforce contracts and extract repayment can be heavy-handed. We believe that greater legal controls need to be put on moneylenders and that criminal penalties should be applied to loan sharks who operate outside of these controls. The Salvation Army also believes that a maximum rate of interest should be set by law as a way of prohibiting exorbitant interest charges.
The social environment we create in our neighbourhoods and communities has a huge impact on people's quality of life. Unrestrained social hazards can have a corrosive effect on communities and the social environment in New Zealand. Perhaps this is why we are beginning to see more people rising up and objecting to what is happening in their neighbourhood. It's great to see. There's, however, a bigger question here, and we need to be prepared to look beyond what's happening in our backyard to what is happening across the whole of New Zealand in terms of social hazards.
In an election, most people do not cast their vote on a single issue, but usually consider a number of issues and the positions of the various parties on these. As you consider how you will vote in this year's election, make your vote count by assessing how the policies offered address issues of social hazards for our communities.
I hope you'll join us for our next episode when we'll talk about work and incomes.